We are filming for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive on the Hamilton campus today. It's an extreme pleasure for me to welcome Ed Shaughnessy for actually part 2 of our interview series.
Didn't get enough before.
No, I didn't get quite enough. I just need another helping. It's been like 2 years or 3?
I think it might be 3.
3.
Yeah.
And how many colleges have you visited since then?
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't. I'd hazard a quick guess and say 20, maybe.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, about.
It seems to be a big part of your career to.
Yeah,
to
it is a big part,
thing.
and I'm very pleased with it because most of my stuff really comes in on recommendation. You know, like one teacher will tell another teacher. I'm sure that's the way it happens because I don't have an agent out there hustling work for me.
Right.
I really don't. So you really do it kind of by reputation, and as you know, in that kind of work at colleges, and I do some high schools too, it's as much, I think, about your ease or ability at working with the kids as much as it is anything about your playing. I mean, you know, they assume you're going to play okay, but I really think getting along with the kids and trying to leave a good inspirational and educational message is an important part. I do.
You had said something, was rereading our last conversation,
Yeah.
that you enjoyed working with kids at this age because they haven't smelled the money yet.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about that. I find that they represent what I was like at that age in the sense of playing the music purely for the music and for the enjoyment and the pleasure and the thrill of it all. And you know, I'll meet a high school guy. It's not uncommon for me to meet a high school guy 10 years later. Sometimes he's the band director who hires me, which is really cute.
Yeah.
He played trumpet with me in the So-So high school band, and now he's the band director at either a high school or a college. And that's really fun, you know.
Yeah.
And he'll say, you know, we had the best time when you were at our high school. I say, you know, did you really? He said, man, he said, you know, I've remembered that night all through the years because the band was really up and we were swinging, and well, those are the kind of things. I mean, it gives me, honestly gives me a chill to tell you about it because that's so far away from commercialism and that whole area, you know. It's what music is supposed to be about.
Yeah. Well, I was observing in the hall last night. I should tell our viewers that, you know, we did a festival here and you played and Byron Stripling and so forth, and the kids were just going down the hall like with their eyes wide open. It's like, oh, that was unbelievable, you know. So those kids will have that same moment that you're describing.
Yeah, that stuff is really what I think bringing pros to campuses is about. I think that's what it's supposed to be about. It's supposed to be something deeper and more meaningful than, gee, he played great. I mean, that's fine, and that's inspirational. It's always inspirational to hear someone that plays great. But I think if you got some other stuff going where you're talking with kids and rapping with them a little bit and stuff like that, and trying the best you can to answer their questions, that means a lot to them. It really does. You know, it's a whole package.
You said as a kid you were a bit of a nut when it came to the drums.
Yeah, I was a bit of a nut, but I find out, you know, the longer I'm in the business and the more that I talk to other people, I find I was a rather common nut. I mean, there's pretty much a thread that seems to run through. I'll give you an example. I knew Tony Williams quite well, and I miss him very much with his very sad early demise. But Tony told me, he himself has told me, although I've seen it in interviews too, it was nothing for him to practice 6 or 8 hours a day on weekends when he was going to school, and it was nothing for him to practice 3 and 4 hours on school days.
Wow.
And Elvin Jones has said he used to practice 8 hours a day anytime that he could. So I don't think the fact that I tried to practice a great deal and play with guys in my neighborhood, I think it was pretty average for a guy who's really carried away with the music and his instrument. I found out I wasn't quite as much of a loner nut as I thought, see.
And, well, it's not a coincidence that those guys you named, including yourself, are the people at the top of their profession.
Yeah, but sometimes you think, I think when I was young, I thought that maybe a guy, and of course, naturally I'm older than Tony Williams would be now, and Elvin's just a couple of years older than me, but I think sometimes when you're growing up, you think some of these great people, maybe they didn't work so hard at it, practice, they just rolled out of bed and it came about, you know. But you find out later that with rare exception, that's not true. They've worked a lot at it, you know, really a whole lot at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was kind of like that. But I was as much fanatica to go to hear the music in New York. I've already told you before, so I'm not going to recount that whole thing, but the fact that I could get from Jersey to New York on a 10-cent subway token was very advantageous. If I lived out in the middle of Ohio or something, I couldn't have had that, see? So I've always thought I was a lucky guy to have great jazz in proximity right up in all these little clubs in the famous 52nd Street that you know a lot about, you know, and that a kid with very little money could sneak in those clubs and learn how to hide in a corner in that and hear Charlie Parker and Art Blakey and Max Roach, you know. Now, just think about that. I mean,
that's...
I'd say it's an unprecedented situation, and I don't know if it'll ever exist again, mostly because if you go to the Blue Note today, a guy just told me, be prepared to put down 25 to 30 bucks to get in.
Exactly.
Then you got a couple of drink minimum. I haven't been to the Blue Note, by the way, but it's like a lot of high-priced clubs. I'm not knocking it, but... Huh?
Yes, I can.
You can testify to that, right?
Yeah.
I imagine you wouldn't want to go in there without $80 in your pocket by the time you got out with a tip and everything. See, that's the difference.
Do you think that the jazz is doing itself a disservice with that kind of, that price thing? And in fact, I know that, I won't mention names, but a young, definitely in the category of young and upcoming artist, I looked into getting here for... And this particular person was charging more than people who'd been in the business for 40 years. For
you mean if you wanted to hire them?
Yes. And I'm wondering, well, how did this happen? And are we pricing the music out?
Baseball is all I can tell you. Maybe they're taking a leaf from professional sports, you know. I don't know. I'm not wise enough to know. I know that you can price yourself out of the business. That's been shown by a few people in the past, where they put such an astronomical price on their services that they start not to get called. But I'm really not that smart about the business end of it to tell you, yes, they are, or no, they're not. I would say this, that I think in jazz, unless you're an unusual guy where the offers are just pouring in, and that doesn't seem to be the most people, I think you'd be rather foolish not to play more for your own playing sake. Than to hold out for that great big pie-in-the-sky money. I mean, I admit freely, I've told you this before, if I'm getting a call from a high school with very limited funds, I do the best I can to get the Selmer folks to help out. They're very good, or the Sabian Symbol people to help out, and I try to find a price that I think is fair for me, but at the same time, I'm adjusting it downward because they're not one of those high schools in an upper middle class area of the rich suburbs. I mean, they're not. Yeah. And it's sort of the same kind of a thing. And I'd rather go and play, and I'd rather go there than not go there, you know. You could sit at home and just say, if I don't get X amount of dollars, I'm not going. It's a free country. But,
right. I keep coming across your name the more I read about you, with things I didn't know you did, with Charlie Ventura.
Yeah, that was my first national exposure.
Jackie and Roy were on the band?
Huh?
Jackie and Roy?
Oh, yeah, that was when I would put his popularity at that time on a par with Chick Corea at his zenith, or any other group that you know had a zenith couple of years. You know what I mean by that? He was, in a sense, a very hot attraction. He was definitely a jazz band, but he had that commercial tinge by the two kids singing the doodly battly beedly vocals. And we would open like the Chicago State Theater. I mean, we would be the, not opening act, we would be the closing act there, which was a very big theater. Or any of the New York theaters that we played, we were the closing act. So for a period of about 2 to 2.5 years, it wasn't very short-lived. I mean, it was very short-lived because Jackie and Roy went off by themselves, and he never quite regained the same height that he had with them. But to make a long story short, that was my first public exposure. I had been out with a couple of, you know, lesser big bands and toured around the country from the age of 17 for about 2 years. And then Charlie, I sat in and played with Charlie a couple of times on 52nd Street. And when he was forming this group, he called me. So that was a really good job because he was a very nice man who encouraged you. Conti Condoli, we were the two babies in the band, the two young kids. You know, Conti's about a year older than me, so we like to say we've worked, now check it out. Conti and I, we're always telling people we've worked together for 6 decades, right? 49, right? The 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and we're in the 90s. Wow. And it's true. We've actually played together for 6 decades. We kind of think that's hip.
That
See,
is
we caught
pretty
the
hip.
40s by 1 year, 49. Yeah, one more year and you could,
Great.
you'd say only 5
Only
decades.
5 decades.
And Conti and I are still playing together with Doc's band. I mean, it's kind of fun, isn't it, to
Yeah.
have a long association like
Absolutely. And he still sounds good, too.
that? Oh, he sounds wonderful. He sounds just great. By the way, the Charlie Ventura stuff has been reissued on CD. It's never been on CD. You either had the big 12-inch LPs or you didn't have it. And it just came out. And I talked to the guy, do you know who Gene Norman is?
The name, yes.
Estimable producer of
right.
jazz concerts during the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
Well, he put out the first half of the program. It was a live concert at Pasadena. It's the best thing we've ever recorded because it's really hot, imminent. You know, you can hear the people and it swings real good. And I don't like everything that I've recorded. You know, there's plenty of things I wouldn't even bother telling you about. But this I liked. It had a good hot quality. And so I saw Gene Norman in a nightclub 2 years ago, and I said, boy, you're some guy. He said, what's the matter with you? I said, why don't you put the second half of our concert out? He says, oh, that's right, I have a second, it looks like I have a second half. I said, yeah, and people all over the country like that. I'm signing the albums, why don't you put out the second half? He says, boy, you're really on your horse. I said, yeah, that was a good band. You got to admit, that was a good, he said, that was a very good band. We sold a lot of records. So about a year ago, the guy says, hey, the second half is out. Conti said the second. So I hope I had a little result, from heckling. I heckled him real good, like, what a bad guy you are, you know, only putting out half a concert. Right. That's a good record if you ever hear it. It's really, it's got a really good hot quality. You know who Benny Green was, the fine black trombone player?
Yeah.
He's passed now. He was a wonderful player, quite original. Had all the bebop stuff down, but he kind of played it his way. He wasn't a J.J. clone. He wasn't a clone of anybody. He had a completely different style of playing.
Wow. You've probably played on numerous albums over the years that your name wasn't printed on, or the names of the musicians weren't on.
Oh yeah, if I might interject, it's annoyed me that the 2 best albums I made with Basie were called Broadway Basie's Way and Hollywood Basie's Way, 2 separate albums on Command Records. Byron has them. He thinks they're great Basie records because Roy Eldridge was on one of them. And they've taken them both and they've put them, I think Decca bought them up, and they've put them into a double album. I'm not talking CD now, I'm talking about LP. And a couple of years ago I spotted it in a store called Showtime instead of Broadway and Hollywood. But there's not one person mentioned on the album. And I mean, with due credit to all the fine soloists, not just myself.
Yeah.
So somebody I know bought the album and said, oh, did you record with Basie? I said, oh, yeah, I did 5 albums with Basie. He said, you know, I just picked up a Basie album, Showtime. That meant nothing to me. He says, you know what I love about the drums on that album? I said, what is it? He said, Strangers in the Night, boom, 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 boom. I said, that's me playing. He said, I thought it was Sonny Payne. I said, that's a nice compliment, but no, that's me. I made Strangers in the Night. Yeah. So they have no idea whether it's me, and they don't. And for people that don't know Lockjaw Davis, who was a great tenor player at the time with the band, they won't know it's Roy Eldridge unless, you know, they know their jazz history. Right. So I'm giving you a very long answer. I hope you don't mind, but you're absolutely right. When they don't list personnel, and they don't even list the period of time when it was made, this is important to a lot of people. The personnel particularly is important, and to you, the sideman, it's important. I'm proud of those albums. They're some of the best things I've ever made, really. Not just because it's Count Basie, but because they came out very well. And the feel was good, and Basie was happy.
And the sound was great.
Yeah, and the sound was good. And it's too bad when they do that, when one company buys them up like that, that they decide we won't give any information, you know, just a generic double Count Basie album. They took them and put them in one, you know, 2 discs. So I hope sometime they'll correct that.
Right. Well, I have it.
You do have it, huh?
Chico O'Farrell arrangements.
Yeah, Chico O'Farrell. You have the original Broadway and Hollywood. Okay. You and Byron are the only 2 people I know beside me. One thing I did, I was so knocked out with those. I enjoyed making them so much, you know. It was a thrill of a lifetime. I don't mind telling you, it was one of the great thrills of my life to record with Basie's band and have it go good. And he was happy, and the band was happy, and I was happy. That I did something I never did before. I ordered a dozen of each of those in a box, and I still have at least 4 of each after giving them to relatives and friends. And am I glad I did that, you know?
Yeah, mint condition is
well,
as
in
they
a
say
way,
at the record
yeah,
store.
the cellophane's still on them, sure. Because sometimes if they go out of print, you'll never get them again.
Yeah.
Or if they go into that Showtime thing, well, that's fine, but there's no identification of you on the band or anything like that.
That's right. It's fun. They sometimes make odd decisions when they re-release things.
Yeah, give me,
I have a
that's
can of-
my story, but give me from your point of view
Well-
as an archivist, do you have this problem sometimes when they'll repackage something, for
Yes.
instance?
A lot of times they're just leaving out names and the dates. I mean, in talking to other archivists, so forth. I don't even consider myself one yet, but they.
Well, let's say you're working at it, you know.
Yeah. That the dates may be messed up. And a lot of times when they do the CD things, I have one of my favorite albums was with Cannonball and Nancy Wilson,
Oh, that's a nice album.
Capitol Records. And when the album came out, they had vocal, instrumental, vocal, instrumental, vocal,
Yes.
instrumental, you know. When the
Alternate.
CD came out, they put all the vocals in a row, and they put all the instrumentals at the end. And it really destroyed the continuity of the album.
Yes.
It was like you were at a club when you listened to it, and the singer would come up and do a tune. Then the band would do a tune.
Yeah, that sounds like nice pacing, actually. The
And,
idea of instrumental, vocal, and
Right.
sounds good.
So I don't know who's in charge here. But
Yeah, there are some very funny things, you know. And then you'll get the reverse. You'll get some of the companies that are very good and fastidious, and they'll give you like the 3 outtakes on How High the Moon, you know, with the false starts, and they'll really get down to it.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like they'll do that. Like some of the new Miles Davis packages that are coming out.
Right.
They'll give you 4 versions of a certain tune and things like that. I don't know if that's overkill. I guess to the student, it's not. They might like to hear the variations, you know.
Yeah.
But I just don't think they should. I think jazz is such a personal music that I think it is unfair to not list the personnel. I really do. I mean, I'm not speaking just for myself alone, but some kid listening to that record, and he has this great trumpet solo and says, gee, that's nice. I wonder who that is. Well, that trumpet solo, if it was on Here's That Rainy Day, I think, was Roy Eldridge. You know, the one and only time that Roy Eldridge ever recorded with the Basie Band. That's what Byron said. Hey, man, that's history. That's what Byron likes about it. I said, gee, Low Jazz played so good. And it's unusual, because he only was with the Basie Band that short period of time.
Wow.
You know? And they do a disservice, I really do think, by not. It's not such a big deal to just list the names. If you don't want to do all of that annotation, as they call it, about every tune, I wouldn't argue about that so much, you know.
Right.
But I do think the personnel, and with jazz stuff especially, you know, it's a disservice to not list people. You know.
You know, if your father hadn't brought home that drum set on the subway that day, do you think you would have continued with the piano? Because you said that you didn't love the piano.
No, I didn't love the piano. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. Well, I don't know, because I had one other little connection to the drums. I was a Boy Scout, and my scoutmaster, who I adored, I thought was a wonderful guy named Joe Ryder. Joe taught drums, and he wasn't a sit-down drum set player. He was a rudimental drummer. You know, he had come out of drum corps and all of that. And I watched Joe once or twice when he was showing guys stuff on a drum pad before I played, and I was starting to get kind of curious about that. So I'd like to think that if my dad hadn't brought home the drums, I might have started in because Joe Ryder, the scoutmaster, was teaching one or two guys in the troop, but I can't really tell you.
Yeah.
You know, somebody said to me, if you had brought home a tuba, do you think you... I said, I don't know. It is funny. Somebody told me the same thing. Who just told me? Was it one of our guys? Have you interviewed Houston yet?
Yes.
Did he tell you how he got the tenor?
I don't think he did.
Well, it's worth repeating, because
right.
it's like the Shaughnessy story of the drums, right? He says, we're all supposed to play piano, my family, so I did a little piano. Then one day, a Sears and Roebuck tenor saxophone showed up for me. I said, you mean they just got it? He said, they just got it.
Wow.
And he started to play. No, I mean, that he didn't ask for it. I said, you're like me in the drums. So I told him the drum story. He thought that was great. He said, man, it was given to us.
Yeah.
He put a nice meaning on it.
Yeah.
It was given. I said, that's right, Houston, it was given to us.
Yeah.
But it was as abstract in a sense as my dad bringing a couple of whole old drums home in lieu of a debt.
Yeah.
Because I said to Houston, Houston, didn't you say to them, buy me a Sears and Roebuck saxophone? He said, no, I never did.
That is so curious.
It just showed up here.
Well, here's a hard question for you. Sometimes music's hard to put into words.
What's the secret of life?
Yeah. Oh, that's easy compared to this. I looked in the Webster Dictionary this morning.
Yeah,
Under swing,
yeah.
it says, jazz music, especially from 1935 to 45, characterized by strong driving rhythm and improvised counterpoint. Are you able, in talking to students or anybody, in fact, to put what swing is into words?
I finally think I can do it. I struggled with it for a long time, but I really think I can do it. The thing is, before I do it, I want to say to you how often swing is used as a noun representing the type of music, right? They'll say the swing bands of the 30s and 40s, right?
Yeah.
And they played swing, okay? We're going to deal with it as, how would you describe it if I'm going to talk about swing as a feeling? Would we say it's still a noun, but it's, I mean, if I say it swings, that's like an adjective, isn't it? Okay,
Yes.
well, I just want to make this clear to anybody who watches this tape.
Yeah.
Because what I find the problem is sometimes is that youngsters, and even oldsters, they mix up the terms to swing and lock it in exclusively to jazz music. Now, I think bluegrass music swings like hell. It swings. Now, what is that swinging I'm talking about? Without drums, right? Mm-hmm. It's infectious. Right. The main thing I think that swing means, for me, is that it's an infectious beat that makes you want to move, whether it's to dance or to sit and tap your foot or to tap your hands, but it makes you want to move in a sense, and in a response to it, it brings something out in you. It gets into you, you know, it maybe makes you happy, but mostly it makes you want to get with it. Infectious is the best word I can use. That's why I don't like the fact that someone who's very hard-headed about anything other than jazz, like if I say to them sometimes, well, you know, some of James Brown's funk rhythms would swing you out into bad health. Well, I don't like rock and roll. I say, look, man, I said, if you can hear that and you can't move yourself, you are dead. They should embalm you, see? But that's a form of swing. Do you know what I'm saying? If you hear a bunch of Africans playing, and they're playing that 12/8 stuff like the Watusi people do, and you know, even if you don't see them dancing, if you hear that, it's infectious. It gets you going too. So to me, any music like bluegrass or jazz or funk music or Watusi music, if it's infectious and communicates to you rhythmically, and gets a visceral thing going, that's what I think swing is about. And I don't think it's an exclusive property of jazz. I really don't. However, some people will play jazz and it doesn't swing. That's the part that I think people should understand. To be swinging is a certain feeling. You can have jazz people playing, but it ain't swinging too good. See?
Yeah.
So I think I'm not going to say the mistake, but I think the error sometimes is to feel that if you're playing jazz, it's necessarily swinging. No, it's not necessarily swinging. You know, it might be a little cerebral and a little abstract, and you don't feel very much of that visceral communication. It might be very good, might be very technical, but it isn't kind of getting to you. That's the absence of swing. That doesn't mean other things can't be there. Improvisation can be there. Imagination can be there, you know, and feeling can be there. But it isn't. I've heard, for instance, a bass and a drummer, both of whom are very good and well known, and they don't play good together. They're not compatible. It never settles into a good, unified pulse. So it isn't swinging too good.
Yeah.
See?
It's so curious the way...
That's a good definition, don't you think?
I like it. I love the word.
I'm not saying it because it's mine, but I mean, infectious is really what swing is about. Hey, yes, you know? When I see audience and I'm playing and I see some of that, it doesn't have to be everybody.
Right.
If I see just a smattering of that, I think we're getting it across. And if I see nobody moving, I don't think we're getting it across.
Right.
Eh?
No, last night, a couple times I'd look out and I'd see some of this.
Yeah.
You know, and I say, well, it's happening now.
That's right.
Is it harder these days, because we don't play for dances that much, for kids to learn swing, because the dancing seemed to be very much connected with swing music at that time?
Well, I don't know. That's a very good observation. I haven't really given it very much thought, but I think it's a good observation for the reason that you're mentioning, and that is the music of prior years that was so associated with dancing had to have a good feeling to make the dancers feel good. I'll give you a short story. I'm playing with Lucky Milner at the Savoy Ballroom in the early 50s. And he says to me, I may have told you this story, I don't know, I can't remember everything we talked about.
So.
But I think it's a fun story enough to repeat. And we're playing at the Savoy, and it's my first week with the band, and I followed Art Blakey. A hard chair to fill. And I'm like, what am I, 22 years old, you know. But they liked the way I played, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, good enough that they didn't roast me. They let me learn, you know. So we're up there the second or third night, and Lucky looks up at me. Lucky was a entirely self-taught musician, didn't read a note, and was one of the best band leaders in the business. He knew how to pace that band for that crowd. Keeping the Savoy crowd happy was a skill. If you didn't do it, they would come toward the bandstand and grumble and talk to you. That's the way they were, all right? Lucky knew how to do that stuff. Stood in front of the band with a little tambourine. Had time like a metronome, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He had that groove going with that tambourine, and he just knew what to do. So he looks up at me and he says, boy, which he loved to say to me, boy. Yeah, kiddingly, you know.
Right.
Boy, you're going to play a whole chorus on the drums in the middle of this tune. The tune was Idaho. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, Idaho. You may remember, it's a very old standard. I said, and he said, boy, if they stop dancing, you're dead. I said, yeah, okay, right, Lucky. He says, don't forget, if they stop dancing, you're dead. So, man, I started out and I went, I didn't care what I played as long as it was swinging. And I probably played real simple, traditional, man, I wasn't going into no heavy bebop or anything, you know, a little more technical or abstracto, and nobody stopped dancing, see? And afterwards he went, you know, okay.
All right.
But that was a good lesson. Boy, they better not stop dancing. See, because that was a big part of up there.
Right.
By the way, when we worked up there, there were two bandstands next to each other, and the music would continually go. There wouldn't be a 5-minute break. We'd finish our last note, the echo would go, next band start up, see? Oh, that was a good training ground up there, because Lucky had a heavy band. They played swing, jazz, you know, that type of stuff, like standards, but they played rhythm and blues too, and that was a good training ground for me to get that kind of funky, shuffly. It's not rock and roll, but I call it the father of rock and roll, because you know, it had the backbeat built in, and it had a little heavier feel. You had to play more bass drum. You couldn't get away with just playing the lighter swing feeling. You had to dig into the drums more, which is why Blakey played it so good, because he had a really deep beat, you know, deep sound. But that was a good experience. I worked with that band. I traveled down south with that band, you know, and found out how they lived in houses instead of, they couldn't go into the hotels. Not in the 50s, they couldn't go in the hotels. So, did I tell you this whole thing about the houses?
No.
I don't think I did.
So in the 50s, you traveled in the South with
Yeah, I
Lucky's
traveled
band
in the
also?
South with Lucky's band. At that time, I believe I was the only white guy in the band. At other times, we had one or two other white guys in the band. But I think on that trip, we did what's called the Chitlin Circuit, which was a group of theaters that they referred to as the Chitlin Circuit. You'd do the Royal Theater in Washington, the Howard Theater in Washington, the Royal Theater in Baltimore, and I think there was one in Philly, and I can't think of the name. And these, of course, were in predominantly black areas. And then you'd finish at the Apollo. So the Chitlin Circuit was sort of a 4-theater circuit, and you would do generally, I guess we did, I don't know if we did a week or maybe 3 or 4 days in each theater. But what I learned that I thought was so interesting, and I think unless you travel with a black band, you wouldn't really know this unless some black friends told you about it. But because they couldn't get into good hotels, they had a whole circuit set up throughout the country. I mean, all bands, not just Lucky's, where you stayed in a private home with 2 or 3 other guys. You had a nice, these are the kind of women that kept meticulous houses, believe me. You had a lovely clean room of your own. For $1 at that time, you could get an all-you-can-eat home-cooked meal in the kitchen. You'd sit around a big table, and the lady would always say, you know, hey, honey, if you come in late tonight, there's a little cold chicken in the icebox. Literally, like, be at home here. And even other amenities, like if you needed a button sewed on, the lady would do, I mean, never take money or nothing. And I thought to myself, many times, out of adversity, I lived better with Lucky's band than I had with Charlie's band, because even though Charlie was very successful to a degree, we weren't making the huge money, the sidemen, that you could stay at the very best places. You know, I wouldn't say we stayed at bad places either, but in a way, I liked the house thing better. It was more like a home environment, you know. And they had a lot of these strung out throughout the country that the black bands would stay at, you know. And I thought it was a very enterprising thing that they did, so that they didn't have to stay in really bad places, you know.
Did you ever get any grief of being the only white fellow?
No, I never did.
Never.
I think that's why the polarization that has taken place to some degree in later years bothers me maybe a little bit more, because I luckily worked in a period of time when if you played well, that was the badge of acceptance. And things started to change in the 60s, naturally, with the social revolution that went on and this and that, and you know, the white drummer in the black band wasn't popular at that time. It really wasn't, and I don't want to go into a great big diatribe about it, but it would be unfair to say, not say it's happened. It's even happening today to some degree.
Right.
And I don't think I could have the same opportunity today that I had then. I honestly don't think so, and I'm sorry that it's that way, because that then, even though we know there were many social ills and things that were very bad for black people, there was the advantage for a white guy like me to gain acceptance on the basis of playing only. It wasn't unhip for me to be in the band, but I know of, I'm not going into details, but I know of at least 3 or 4 situations where even the regular white drummer who had rehearsed with black groups has not been taken on tour, and he's been told, quite frankly, it wouldn't be considered too hip today for him to do that.
see.
Oh yeah, I mean, these are situations that I've been told personally.
Certainly a disservice to the music.
Yeah, it's a disservice to the music, and you know, it's one of those things. I'm sure many black people, if they look at this tape, would say, well, you know, I mean, we've certainly had enough problems in the past and this and that. But I love a thing that Abby Lincoln said a couple of years ago. Somebody was talking about the predominance of black players in jazz, and I think anybody that knows jazz would say that's true. Fine, you know. If you want to say 80%, I'm going to go real high on the ladder. Let's say we're going to make a general quote of maybe 80% of the most influential players have been black. I don't know if that's right, okay? This is just an example. And Abby said, yeah, I know, we may have had a lot to do with it, but we don't own it. And I thought that was a very good statement. And Abby was very politically active in the 60s. I know Abby a bit. I knew Max when she was married, Max Roach when she was married to him. And she was quite active politically, as was Max. And I've always admired them both for that, because it wasn't easiest on their careers to really stand up for what they felt was right, you know, for black people's rights. But I liked what she said about we don't own it, meaning I can't sit here and say Kathleen Battle shouldn't be in the Opera House.
Right.
Because she's not a Middle European descendant, you know what I mean?
Right.
Hey, they own opera. Wouldn't that sound stupid?
Yeah,
or to say
absolutely.
anything Leontine Price has done. Well, it's negated by the fact that she's not a Middle European. I mean, you're laughing because it's so silly.
And like basketball was invented by a white man.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. And that's why it makes me a little bit sad to see some of the polarization that's going on. But don't forget, I'm sure you know, the polarization is beyond music right now. It's in a lot of areas of life. I'm sure you know that. You know, on certain college campuses, there's quite a polarization of people. The way they hang out, the way they, you know, I mean, I was in Oklahoma, and in the cafeteria, everybody was sitting mixed. There was black, white, green, and yellow people all mixed up. And then I was in a more northern college, and I can't remember literally which it was, and it doesn't matter anyway, and everybody was in clusters. There was a black table, there was an Asian table, and then there was a whatever table, you know. And it was such a stark difference. Obviously there, everything is group-wise, you know, and in the Oklahoma college, which used to have been called maybe more of a Southern college, man, it was a rainbow mixture, you know?
Yeah.
So that's just the times we live in.
Right.
But I hope that we'll see a little more of the relaxed atmosphere. Our music, jazz music, was always sort of different in that respect, you know? A lot of black and white guys got along like real brothers under the skin because of the music. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that was a great thing. I did, you know, I was lucky enough to live through that period of time when I even think a lot of the music was good with the intermixture of people. A lot of the groups that I belonged to, I thought were the best were the ones that were black and white. There was, I don't know, it was a great mixture of styles and things like that.
Right.
You know? So.
Talking about mixtures of styles, can we talk just for a moment about when rock and roll came along, and were there particular drummers that seemed to catch on to the rock and roll thing? When I listen to some of the early Chuck Berry recordings, it's really curious because Chuck is definitely into the rock and roll, but the rhythm section's trying to like feel out what's going on here. They're pretty much still playing.
Well, I wouldn't call myself at all a rock and roll historian. Therefore, I'll speak from the limited knowledge I have. I'm not a rock and roll historian, and I can only say what I've seen and witnessed and experienced. But what I saw happen was that a great many drummers and bass players couldn't cross over. What I mean by that is a lot of them who had a strictly jazz background couldn't get into the straight 8th and 16th feel. Some of them, many of them didn't try hard enough. In my case, I came up strictly as a jazz drummer, right? And I wasn't thrilled by Bill Haley and the Comets at all. I mean, to me, it was real troglodyte rhythm, you know, so simplistic. I not only didn't pay attention to it, but I really didn't think it was meant very much. No offense to Bill Haley, but that's just coming as a jazz drummer, you know, that was way down the line to me. Then as the music got a little more sophisticated, especially with stuff like James Brown's rhythms and drummers, that really caught my ear because in a way, it almost had sort of the improvisational stuff going on. The drummers were making up some really interesting beats, you know, sophisticated, based on the rock and roll straight feeling. And when that came along, as a defense, I'm not going to say I did it because I'm so altruistic. I said, I think I better get on the wagon because the wagon is getting bigger, you know. And I used to sit up in my little studio in New York where I taught on Saturdays, other days of the week, and I'd buy James Brown records, I'd buy Sly and the Family Stone, and I would sit and work with it. I'm not going to tell you, Monk, that I just said to myself, hey, I think I'll play some rock and roll. When you're used to going da 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 ba ba dee dee da with the jazz 12/8 feeling, to get into it's another thing, believe me. And I've got a pretty good ear and I catch on fairly fast, but I don't think anybody playing one style for, let's say, 15 years is all of a sudden just going to push a button and say, hey, now I'll be a rock and roll drummer. Right. So in my case, I liked the newer stuff, so it wasn't as hard to practice it. And I put a lot of time in on it because it's funny, but I'm glad I did, because when I got on The Tonight Show, this is before The Tonight Show, well, in the 60s. When I got on The Tonight Show, in the very early 60s, I got on The Tonight Show, I started in 63. I'd been doing this for a couple of years, you know, on record dates and things. I was not a first call rock and roll drummer. There were plenty of other people, like Bernard Purdie would have been a first call. That was his meat. He was the boss of that stuff, and very, very deservedly so, one of the great drummers. But I mean, I had played a lot of gigs and work where I had to play half rock, half jazz. They called me for that. And then when I got on The Tonight Show, we definitely had a lot of funk acts and a lot of rock acts. So I'm kind of glad I broke the ice and did it for a couple of years. And quite frankly, that was a requisite on that show. If you were a drummer that only played very good jazz and you didn't play very good rock, you couldn't have that job. I couldn't even call some subs that were wonderful jazz drummers, but they didn't play rock well. Doc says, don't call them. I had a complaint last time from an act because it's a rock act and they don't play the style. So, seriously.
Yeah, sure.
It was. I'm just saying that was the requisite of the job, because you had to play equally well. You didn't have to be a genius, but you had to play professionally well. You had to understand it, you know.
Of course. Well, if you had a jazz guest on the show and you had a person in the drums chair who could just do rock stuff, they would say the same
They
complaint.
would say the same thing. Yeah, it's a very good point. That's right. I couldn't call a guy who was a straight rock player either because this jazz stuff would be too weak, you know?
Right.
And big band jazz, I think you really have to have a little more experience at that than small band jazz. What I mean is you have to have had also some big band jazz experience, not just combo experience.
Yeah.
Because most combo drummers don't speak with a big enough sound for a big band. They don't know how to get a bigger sound. It's not a case of louder. It's a case of fuller, like a good lead alto player. What does he need? A good full sound, right? It's sort of like that, or a good lead trumpet player, you know. You have to know how to generate a fuller sound for that. So anyway, our original question, I hope we didn't wander off it, was that, yes, some players adapted, and I'd say some players did not. And the players that did not soon found the work was really trickling away from them because there was such a little bit of jazz going on, even around New York. I mean, the jazz clubs were all closing up, and you know, it was a kind of a different scene was going on.
Was there a period of a number of years where, as you look back on your career, that were the toughest?
The toughest?
Let's say it was a struggle to find enough work.
Well, I'm a very lucky guy because the only time that I had that was in the beginning. I worked at the phone company. I'd had a couple of day jobs, and I'd only work a few gigs at night. And I can honestly tell you that from the age of less than 18, at 17 and a half, I was earning a living at music.
Wow.
It was a small living, but I didn't have to work a day job anymore.
Wow.
See, I graduated high school at 16, so I worked at the phone company from 16 to about 17 and a half, and I put in my union card. You had to establish residence in New York, so I got a little one-room Coldwater flat, and I lived there and worked at the phone company, and you had to put in residency for a year. You had to, you know, really live there. They come and check on you and all that.
Yeah.
And I really feel very lucky. Once I started out with a couple of these traveling bands like Randy Brooks and Bobby Byrne, who were, you know, second or third layer bands, good bands, by the way, quite good, musical, played in tune, good bands and good leaders. They just weren't the Dorseys and the Goodmans, you know. But from about 17 and a half, I never had to take a day job, but I did have to collect unemployment a couple of times in between gigs. I'm not going to say I was on the gravy train. I wasn't.
Right.
But I think once I got on Charlie's band, I got national attention. I don't think I had to collect unemployment. So I think after about 19 and 20, I was starting to earn my living pretty good after that.
Do you think your father was pleased that that little drum set he brought home that day turned into a career for you?
I'd love to give you a happy ending to that, but my dad left home. He and my mother broke up. It's not like he walked out deserted. They decided to split about, I think, when I was 16, and I was just starting in really studying the drums, so he never really, I don't know what he knew later. I never saw him after that.
No kidding.
Not once.
Wow.
Not once. I tried to, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I think my mom had told him it'd be better to stay away, and he and I always got along. He wasn't an abusive father, nothing like that. He was an alcoholic, but not an abusive man.
Right.
But I'm sorry to tell you, I tried to look him up once or twice, and he had moved, and I'd like to think that maybe he knew that I was successful at drums because he brought the drums home, but I actually can't tell you.
Right.
It's one of those things, you know, kind of lost in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You fellas on The Tonight Show must have been monstrous readers.
Oh, yeah, you had to be a crackerjack reader, yeah, because the music came in at 3:15. You had a chance to play the tune once to make sure there were no wrong notes and kind of, you know, make sure there were no problems. Then the artist would go out at the mic as if it was the real show without their costume on, and they put the lights on and everything looked like a show, and would play it a second time, and then the third time was during the show. So I'm not saying we couldn't play it another time, but on the average, we played it twice before you heard it.
Yeah.
That's the average. So everybody had to be a crackerjack sight reader, and again, good at shifting styles. Of course, one tune, Tony Bennett would be on, boom, you play a swing type tune. Maybe the next act would be Anita Baker. Did I tell you a story about Anita Baker? Do you remember a story about Anita Baker? Well, this is what I call defensive listening, right? I'm not doing this to blow my horn, but you had to do this. I used to do defensive listening in my car. Instead of putting in a jazz tape, I would turn on the radio and listen to the pop radio stations. Not my favorite music at all, but I listen a lot, get the feel, right? So Anita Baker comes up, and she's got this tune that's quite popular at the time. I can't remember the name. And I remember the way it goes, so I played a beat that's on the record, but it ain't on the music. The music is real simplistic, like
yeah.
1 and 2 and, you know, and I'm going, bam, chichaco, patika, kupata, bam, tataku. And she turns around, you know. And after we get done, she comes up to me and she says, "You heard the record?" I says, "Yeah." She says, "Thank you." She says, "They still haven't changed that damn part. And if there's anything I hate is to hear, choo, 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 choo." But I played the beat that I heard on the records. So that's how defensive listening sometimes would help you, see.
Sure.
And I was pleased, because, you know, your job, it's like Milton Hinton says, when you're in gigs like that, you're performing a rhythmic service. That's what Milton calls it. And it's true. You know, I mean, you're there to help them to sound good. You're not there to blow your own horn, see? So I always loved that. Because she came up to me as if she was going to scold me. She says, "Ah, you heard the record." Like Sneaky, you know?
Right. That's a good story.
Yeah, but anyway, you're right about having to be, everybody in every chair had to be a very good reader. That's why kids that I see at clinics give me all this nonsense about, you know, why should I bother to read, and so-and-so doesn't read. I said, that's fine, and then so-and-so isn't trying to go into a lot of areas of work that he can't do. He couldn't do the Tonight Show. That doesn't mean he's not a wonderful drummer. You know, doesn't matter who we're talking about, but there are a few guys that don't read out there. I said, fine. But the point is, you'd get more work if you can read. It's as simple as that, you know? It's like, let's say you can't read a book, or you can't read an application. I mean, yes, there are some jobs you could bag groceries the rest of your life, where you might move up the ladder if you could read. It's the same thing, you know? It's not that you can't get along, but why should you limit yourself?
Yeah, that's a pretty old-fashioned thing. Like, well, if I learn to read, I'm going to lose my spontaneity.
Yes, or will it hurt my jazz, is the old line.
Yeah.
I don't want reading to hurt my jazz. Yeah, but you'd be surprised. Some kids love to catch on to that because they don't have to want to bother.
Yeah.
So you know what I say? Because the example that was given for years was Buddy Rich. See? So I would get at clinics, "Oh, Buddy Rich doesn't read. Why should I read?" And my rejoinder is, do you think you're as talented as Buddy Rich? If you are, you shouldn't be here. You should be out earning like he did at the age of 4 years of age, $1,000 a week in 1921. You think you're that talented? The highest paid, second highest paid child star in the world? Do you think that you're as talented as he was? Or is he? That's when he was alive. I said, oh. I said, well, see, that's the difference. He could get by without reading because he had way more talent than most of us. And I, of course, say most of us. Of course, I mean it. Natural gift. He was second highest paid child star to Shirley Temple, I think. Or Jackie Cooper. Yeah.
He was a dancer and...
He was a dancer, he was a drummer, and he was Little Traps, and he toured Australia and the world, and he made $1,000 a week, which at that time, I wouldn't even want to say how much money. And it was 1921 because he was born in 1917. And it was in like Guinness Books records that he was the second highest paid child star in the world. Now that's a Mozart prodigy. Doc used to call him the Mozart of the drums. So that's what I try to use, you know, when they give me that thing. Today they might say it about another guy or two that I know who are very good drummers who don't read. But I keep saying to them, okay, maybe, I wonder if you're as good as so-and-so. Now I'll use those names because Buddy's kind of gone, you know. And I'll say, do you think you're as good as such a? Well, I don't know. I said, well, if you're not, boy, maybe you better read just in case you're not as good as him, see.
Didn't they pull some stunts on him when he got on the Tonight Show a few times with his
Oh, yeah, I had to make up a drum head on the big floor tom-tom that sits over here, you know, the big tom. I had to make it up out of paper.
Yeah.
And when he, in between the rehearsal, of course, and the show, so he played on it, it was fine. And I had the guys make it days before, and we put this on. It looked just like a real nice drum head, and he never looks at anything when he sat down. This is a rented set, you know. Yeah. And the first time he hits it, he goes right through, and his whole arm went down. He turned around off mic and said, "You son of a bitch, Shaughnessy." He knew who did it. Yeah, that's true. And another time I had to make up a cymbal, looked just like a real cymbal, up on the left crash thing here, and they made it out of a plastic. They sort of baked a plastic thing. It looked just like a cymbal. I swear, I don't know how they did. I think they took the mold from the real cymbal, and the first time he hit it, it exploded into a million things. we did both those. Well, he was a terrible prankster himself, see? So he had to be able to take it. Oh, yeah.
Did he ever get back to you,
No, not really. I think he liked it, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
I think he could have made so much laughs, so much
Right.
fun, you know. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We
They
did
had a
laugh.
classic Muppet episode he was on where he basically played the stage.
Yeah.
He went out and...
And in the middle, he stops. He says, "When I play a room, I play a
That's
room."
right.
I promised Bernard Purdy that I would give him a copy of that. He doesn't have it.
Oh.
And I saw him recently. I did a clinic with Louis Belson. I arranged a couple of 2 drum deals, you know, and we were up in Manchester, Connecticut about 3 weeks ago. And Bernard said, "Oh, that sounds like such fun." So I said, "I'll make you a dub and send it to you."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's in the near future for you? Yeah, I know you're doing occasional tours with the Tonight Show Band.
Yeah, we're doing either 3 or 4 tours a year with Doc Severinsen and the Tonight Show Band, and that's a lot of fun. Of course, I have a lot of old friends in the band, you know, and the band sounds great. And let me think. I've got, I always do my 2 weeks of summer teaching at Skidmore College up in Saratoga, New York. I look forward to that. That's a lot of fun. And generally, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing, which is, I'm really back to doing what I did in the beginning, a freelance jazz drummer. I mean, seriously, I'm kind of, the circles come around.
Right.
You know, the phone rings, so you got a A&P store opening, I come. You got a bar mitzvah, I come. You know. And I'm doing that, and I'm enjoying it. I like the variety of it. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, I have that mixture where I teach enough that I enjoy the teaching part of it. And, it's about, I'd say 70% playing, 30% teaching, and I like that. And I'm happy with the mix. I don't really have any you know, unrealized ambitions. I wish I'd get a little more work from my quintet that I have, but a lot of places that used to hire us, like schools, don't have quite enough money to bring 5 guys across the country. The airfares and everything are very prohibitive, you know. So we only do a couple of gigs a year. I wish we could do more because everybody likes the group, and I have got guys that do good clinics, like on brass, reeds, you know, piano, bass, and drums. I like to do more with that group, but you just can do, even Phil Woods told me he's working more as a single now than he is with his group. Right. As great as he is and as wonderful a name as Phil has, but he told me lately he's been out more single, you know, same thing, air expense. You deal with that all the time, of course, trying to bring people in, don't you?
Well, I want to compliment you on your professionalism, too, as far as just dealing with business stuff. Made it much easier for me.
Well, thank you.
You know, I mean, just
Whatever.
little things like, here's what I need to do, here's what it costs, and get your own plane ticket and that kind of stuff. And
yeah, well, I always think it's just as easy to do it because, in a way, it's good for me. I can leave at a time that's good for me for, you know, I know when our traffic jams are, for instance. I don't expect you to know that. Silly things like that, but it's true. If you leave just a little bit earlier in L.A., you get ahead of all that madness, you know, and I'd rather get up earlier and get ahead of the madness and stuff, But I'm glad. I hope it does help you. I'm pleased that you had us come out for this. This was really nice, and I know the kids enjoyed it a lot. I could tell by their reaction, you know, that's, in a way, that's the most important part, right? That they have a good time and they learn something.
Right.
Now, one drummer stopped me and said, "Man," last night, after it was all over, he said, "Man, I'm going to go home and practice so hard. You've really inspired me." I said, "No, that's the best thing you can say to me. I'd rather hear that than how did I play." He said, "Oh, you played wonderful." I said, "No, I didn't say that. I'm not fishing for you to tell me. I'm telling you that the best thing you could say is that I inspired you to go home and practice," because I said, that's what guys used to do for me. I'd hear some great drummer play. I said, "Oh, I got to go home and practice. I got to get better." You know, what a good example that was of drumming. So that's the best compliment.
Yeah.
You know.
It's great that circle is...
Yeah, that's what you hope to leave, is a little inspiration, absolutely. How about you? I'm going to be devil's advocate and turn it around. Do you have any ambitions with your archives or anything like that you hope to realize soon or in a while?
Well, first of all, to get it open to the public.
Yes, that's the first thing.
It will be soon. We're figuring out how to disseminate the information in a way that honors the artist and so forth. Yeah. There's a lot of questions these days with the internet and all that about putting all this stuff out there.
Oh, yeah.
Keeping copyright issues in mind.
Yes, it's a little touchy, isn't it?
It gets more confusing as you go along. I have been very blessed with this project to associate with all my people that I listened to as I came up.
Oh, sure.
You know, listening to these records, and I'm always the type of person who loved to read the liner notes and
I always
who
did
played
too.
on who.
Oh, I always like to read the liner
You
notes.
know, and now Snooky Young's with this band, and you know.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they-
I always like to read the liner notes. In fact, I was always disappointed if they didn't have good liner
Right.
notes, you know, or extensive liner
Right.
notes, yeah.
So now to get to talk to all these folks has just been a real treat, and it's been inspired me to write some new compositions that
Good for you.
down the line maybe I'll record.
So that's inspired you a little bit.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
terrific. Just let's say, generally speaking, have you hoped to possibly make your archive stuff accessible on the internet? Possibly? I'm just saying possibly.
I think the plan is right now to put samplings out with some visuals, perhaps. You know, we have to get a website up and put samples of things, and of course list the people we have.
Yeah,
Maybe
it
some
seems to
little
me that
quotes.
that would be the right step. I mean, the idea of having everything available on the web, I mean, first of all, it's such a huge undertaking that I couldn't conceive how long it would take.
Right.
But putting samplings to show people who might be interested, who
Right.
might like to come,
Right.
that would be what it's aimed at, isn't it? To
Yeah,
show what we have,
absolutely.
the kind of stuff that we have. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would really give you exposure, as they say.
Yep.
You know.
We've been contacted from Downbeat magazine about perhaps using they have a satellite thing set up where they might beam stuff down to some schools that don't have music programs.
Oh, yeah.
So that sounds like something for us
No,
to
that's
look into.
kind of good. Yeah. Now, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Yeah, to places that don't have
Right.
anything much in the way of good library books on jazz
Right.
or any source of history, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I tell you, as we all know, there's no limit to the good stuff that the internet can do. It's even done a few good things for me. I've told you, I've found guys that have tapes of albums that I've lost or given away or something, you know, and they're nice enough to send them to you. Gee, it's terrific. I had a guy from Scotland send me an email, and he says, we're the Jimmy Press, Jimi. They're the biggest Jimi Hendrix fan club in the world. We know, now check this out, we know that on April 19th, 1969, you played with Jimi Hendrix when his drummer got sick. Now, I know I played with Jimi Hendrix. Do you think I could have told you what year it was, much less what day it was?
Wow.
And we wonder if you would be kind enough to write a few paragraphs and either email or mail us for our Jimmy Press monthly publication. See? So I get back to them by the email, and I said, sure, I'll be glad to do that for you guys. I said, Jimmy was a very colorful character, and I can give you a couple of cute anecdotes, you know, leopard skin pants, and me saying to Doc Severinsen, I ain't playing with no Jimi Hendrix in a suit and a tie. And he said, no, you don't want to do that. So I took off my tie, took off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and, you know, at least I fit a little better with Jimi Hendrix and snakeskin pants and rainbow shirt and all of that. And anyway, the story is that I did do this for them. I wrote a couple of paragraphs out about what transpired that day and what tunes I thought we had rehearsed, and they corrected me on one of the tunes. I mean, they got some stuff. And then do you know what they did? They said, you've been so nice, and they published it, and they sent me a copy, and they sent a note with the magazine. They said, you've been so nice about helping us out with this, that we're going to trace down the bootleg copy of you playing with Jimi Hendrix that is around Europe in a few places. Not video, because they didn't have video cameras. And last week, the tape arrived from London. They found a guy in Germany, and he ran a copy. He's a Jimmy Press fan. Sent it to them, and they sent it to me. Now, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
The web has got such good, positive stuff like that, you know. Now, I haven't listened to it yet. I was busy. I've been traveling. But it's fun to have it, you know.
Sure.
I mean, where else would I have found a tape of playing with Jimi Hendrix? Just through these guys, right?
Yeah.
They know everything. I mean, Jesus. They knew Johnny Carson was off that night, and Flip Wilson was the sub-host. I don't remember that. You know, I did over 5,000 shows. Am I supposed to remember who was hosting April 19th, 1969? These dudes know. Don't ask me how they know, but and everything they say is right.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, you played Loverman, too. I had said we played something with fire in the title, a famous Jimi Hendrix tune, Fire something.
Yeah.
And they said, that's right, and you also played Loverman, which I had forgotten. Yeah.
Did it swing?
I don't know. I'll tell you what, they say it sounds real good.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating.
Oh, yeah. And Jimmy blew out all the wires in the NBC main cable by stepping on an effects pedal that they told him not to hit.
Oh.
In rehearsal, he touched it, and everything went... And they said, Jimmy, don't use that pedal. because it's an overload on the main cable. And during the show, he got hot, and I thought to myself, "I bet he's going to hit it." And he went, "Yeah!" and he blew out that line, and we stopped. They had to put in a new line, and then we went on again.
No kidding.
Yeah, that was a funny incident. It really was.
Well,
He was a lot like Charlie Mingus. I think that's why I got along with him. He was kind of a real independent, I don't know. It's hard to describe. But if you knew Charlie Mingus, that was Jimmy was like that. You know, just deal real direct with him, real straight. Just that, play loud as hell and give me a lot of cymbals, Ed. I said, "Okay, Jimmy, I'm going to do the best I can." He said, "I heard you play with Charlie Mingus. It's going to go fine." Yeah,
Wow.
that's the way it was. Made you feel good, you know, relax.
Yeah. Cool. Well, listen, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's great to be
Sure
up
we'll
here
see
with
each
you and
other.
see where you keep all your records, man, with the spider's webs on and all.
Right. Guess what we got in here?
The archives.
All right, we'll see you again. I'm sure.
Real good. I hope so, Monk. Thank you.